Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May 17th session of the Southern Fried DNN User Group. We are excited to be here with you tonight to have a general open conversation. We're going to have a group conversation where we talk about general ideas, and we want your input as we go through. For everyone who's watching this later on recorded, you can join conversations on Facebook and other community locations, but here for tonight, we're looking forward with engaging with everybody who's online and specifically with our guest for this evening, Dawn Watkins of Siteimprove. I'll do some introductions in just a moment and talk a little bit more about Siteimprove, but as we do on every Southern Fried DNN User Group meeting, we will kind of kick off by running through our outline for the day, and then we'll come back to some specifics. So again, our main presenter and conversation will involve Siteimprove, and we'll be talking about ADA compliance, what it is, why it's difficult, traps, tests, tools, and we'll really talk about some of the tools that have been produced by Siteimprove and how they can help any website, and of course including DNN websites, to help with ADA compliance. So we'll kind of kick off with that in just a moment, but as we do with any DNN user group meeting, let's talk a little bit about community and some of the things that are going on around the web right now. There was here just the other day another technology ecosystem advisory group meeting. David, Clint, do you guys want to weigh in a little bit on, or chime in a little bit on things that have been discussed lately?
Yes, so it may be hard to hear me from out there, so you might want to repeat. But the big news from that meeting is that Mitchell Sellers is kind of taking the lead of the group. Sean is still there and still involved. He just can't handle the weekly logistics of the meeting. So Mitchell is going to be putting a lot of energy and energy and momentum into the group. So. And David asked them if they could hear me. I don't know.
Your voice usually carries really well in here on this.
Yes, I these.
It's that loud southern mouth.
It's good frequency for this mic, so mine not so much.
So the group felt that there was a lot of progress.
Yeah, positive step forward.
Yeah, a lot of stuff got done there, and Mitch was kind of the go-between in between the community and ESW and the community and Microsoft, because Mitchell is obviously Microsoft MVP. So, he's a good fit there. Then also you see Ernst Peter's blog there. He and his team have converted the reports and events module to C#, which, is not just like a simple thing.
Yeah, that's not a small item. Yeah.
Yeah, and also Daniel is on the meeting. We should also call out that he has put a lot of energy into getting a lot of the old modules current. So some of them don't even make sense anymore, but then a lot of them are still in use.
Yeah,
they're still in use. Yeah,
many of them are.
So Daniel, kudos for that. And Daniel, anything you want to say about that? Any plugs?
I think we're going to try to get him on.
We're trying to get him to speak.
I'll have a bit more done for the next meeting. Right now, I've compiled a list of all the modules that used to come with DNN. I've made a spreadsheet listing the current status of each of them. So if they are DNN 9.1, 9.2 compatible, and I installed a virtual machine with DNN 4, and I'm actually doing the upgrade step by step with each versions to make sure that someone with an old site can still upgrade, because I think it's important that people who had them can at least upgrade. They're not all perfect, they're not all the best, but they were provided with DNN. So I think it's important for the reputation of the platform that at least you can upgrade to the latest version and keep your data.
We're very excited about having you on for our next meeting to go through that, because that's going to be that's a big impact on the community, and it's a big gift to the community, that effort you're putting into it. So I'm looking forward to talking about that and hearing more about it.
Yep. So we had that. Daniel also wrote a blog about how to secure a DNN site with an SSL cert, which you know, it's kind of one of the judges of if you have written good content is, does Francisco decide to translate it?
Yes, I didn't realize that was the one.
Yes, in English and Spanish.
Yes.
So if you write a blog and then like a couple of days later it shows up in Spanish, that means it was probably a pretty good blog, right?
So yes, this is Daniel's original,
Yep.
and then the new version was posted about 6 days later. Yep.
Yeah. So we also, you know, it's important that we promote the TADUB, which is the Toronto area user group. Addison, they had a meeting where Joe Craig, DNN legend, presented on structured content.
I was there for that.
Huh?
I was there for that.
Yeah, that's right. He's got a blog about that. And let's see, what else? So Daniel Metler, he's continuing to drop 2 sexy content blogs. Andrew Heffling wrote a blog, which is at the bottom of that page, I believe, about NBC routing, module routing. So Andrew is kind of new to the DNN community, but he's got a lot of like NBC experience, a lot of like continuous integration experience. So he's bringing in a lot of goodness into the community. So he's made some pull requests on the NBC stuff. So you got all that going on. We had a DNN Digest come out in which I had a spelling error, which I will admit.
You heard about that, right?
Yeah.
Your mom is reading.
Yeah. I said I'm gonna start sending the preview to you, so she can vet. We had an MVP meeting today. We have weekly DNN Docs meetings and DNN Technology Group meetings, and DNN Connect is coming up. That's about all I know.
David, anything to chime in and add there? We know that you're going to DNN Connect.
Yes, sir. I am leaving soon.
I think on Facebook I saw some notes of, I need a place to stay when XYZ. Is that the MO for your trip? You're going to kind of paddle along with everyone and kind of hop, skip, and see where you land when you get there?
I haven't thought about that yet, but yes, I will try to figure it out.
Okay, all right. Okay.
I'm the same way. I don't have anywhere to stay that Sunday. I think Saturday night. Sunday.
After the
breakfast or whatever, I fly out on Monday. So I'm like, okay, where am I going to stay Sunday night?
So there's certainly still time for people to decide they want to go to DNN Connect. It is if you've been to events in the States, it's a different type of event. It's a different type of atmosphere. I myself haven't been to one yet, but I'm looking forward to going in the future. Anybody who still wants to go now, you certainly have time to jump on that plane and get out there here at the end of May. All right. Well, let's bring it back around to our topic for the evening. I mentioned that often enough we'll have different types of Southern Fried DNN User Group meetings. Sometimes we'll have presenters come in and give a very specific presentation on a new module. Sometimes we'll have a roundtable session in which we will talk about a topic and get good, opposing, and heated and varying different kinds of opinions going. And I don't think we'll have that kind of conversation specifically tonight, but this is an open conversation. So I'm encouraging everyone who's joining who has an interest in learning more about ADA compliance, learning about the issues with it. If you have specific experience and questions that you want to ask to the group, tonight's going to be a meeting that's going to help you do that. I briefly met Dawn Watkins at DNN Summit here this past January and learned about Siteimprove. I don't think they were something that I had seen or really heard about before. But shortly after that, one of our first client projects had ADA compliance as a requirement that came up, and I'll share an anecdote there about that. But it suddenly put it on the radar for me, and it was something that I knew of and was lightly aware of. But I got more involved, and I got to see what complications there are and how hard things can be sometimes with third-party modules or specific DNN types of pages. Other things are very, very simple, and very small little tweaks can make a big difference. So it was a brief glimpse into a much larger field of information, and that really sparked the idea of having Siteimprove come to spend time with us at a meeting like today's meeting. So what we're going to get into is talking about ADA compliance, explaining what it is, how does it apply and who does it apply to, how do you test for it, what kind of resources can you use, and specifically we're going to spend some time taking a look at the Siteimprove service and specifically the module that can be installed in DNN, and we'll talk about that a good bit. Dawn, with that as kind of an introduction, would you like to introduce yourself just a little bit and describe, who Siteimprove is and what you do for folks?
Okay, you got it. So Siteimprove is an automated crawler, software as a service that will crawl through all the code that's out there on your site, and it'll look for anything that can be automatically checked against the WCAG guidelines. And once we go into my presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about what that means and what web accessibility is and how that relates to ADA and all that. But the great thing about this automated, this tool is that it's not just about accessibility, because the reality is that accessibility also feeds into your SEO. There's a lot of overlap in those categories. We also have a quality assurance module that will just check, so we could have caught that spelling error for you before you sent it out. We've got the spelling checker. We've got the 404 errors, the broken links checker.
Yeah.
You can inventory documents, your media files, your PDFs, whatever you got out there, so you can just get a good kind of, understanding of what is being presented as part of your digital, environment. And that is for the developer. Like, it's like you guys, it's kind of part of an agency. You can do it as you're developing a site, so you can be doing these tests before you go live, and then if it is that you then pass off, your designs to a customer, we can work on some partnerships where you pass off, the Siteimprove to them. So then they would pick up the cost for the scanning and stuff like that. So that's that. And then me, I saw someone using a screen reader tool back in 2009 on my website. I was a government web administrator, and it was shocking. I had no idea all of the difficulties that someone has when you don't program properly, and how they can't get through your site, and how we're all, trying to do tasks and be independent and do things. And so it really kind of shook me to my core and made me evaluate, the need for this and prioritizing it. And I became the girl that every time somebody sees me, our developers, our project managers would be like, oh, she's going to talk to us about accessibility. But I kind of loved that title. I kind of loved being the person who was doing that. And so I did that for about 15 years with state government, and then I moved over into higher ed with Texas A&M, and then just in the last year, I became a consultant for Siteimprove.
That path makes sense. That's a good segue into getting a foundation. Not knowing where everyone is at different levels, they may or may not know and understand what ADA accessibility is, just to begin with. But which I'm going to pass that question to you in a second. But another point about why we're having this meeting this month is that I believe you said that May is ADA Awareness Month. That's the case?
Well, even better, today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So you guys are doing this on the most perfect day. So that day was established about, I believe it was 5, 6 years ago.
No, we were chiming in. We're like, yeah, we need to tweet this. We need to put it out. DNN Accessibility Meeting on Accessibility Day. Yes.
Yes. Hashtag GAAD. So GAAD all day today. And it's been around for a little while now. It's gained a lot of traction. So so it's great that we're doing it today.
Excellent, excellent. Maybe David and some of his contacts he has can get us over to Kenny Loggins, and he can make a song, and then we're set to promote it right there next to Earth Day. So tell us about ADA as a base introduction. What is what is ADA? Abbreviation, what it stands for. On screen, I've kind of brought up ada.gov and specifically the web accessibility part of it. But give us the textbook.
Okay. So the American with Disabilities Act was put into place quite a while ago, and then they added on well, the ADA was really originally about physical spaces. Like it was about making doorways big enough and bathrooms accessible and all that.
Yep. It was about wheelchair ramps and, like you said, doors of the right width, so wheelchairs and people with mobility issues would be able to physically access buildings. Definitely, yeah. And so, like, one of the first sentences, if you read the very dry material that the government puts out, is basically make sure everything is accessible by everyone. Well, that's a very broad statement. And the reality is that when they first came out with ADA, they did not have the Internet in mind because everything in there is about physical spaces. So about a couple years ago, you started seeing these litigations happen where people were saying, oh, sure, I can get into your building, but because you do all of your business online, I want to pay my taxes, I want to pay my phone bill, I want to pay whatever online, you need to make that accessible as well. So as much things are driven by, people's needs, as the cases increased, the ADA determined, hey, we should put some rules in here about the web. And what those rules are called are the website accessibility accessibility guidelines, or WCAG, and WCAG. And those WCAG guidelines were proposed in 2016. Yeah, they were proposed in 2016, and you know how the federal government is about changing anything. It had to go through lots of people thinking about it and doing studies, and it had to go through people responding to questions about how they felt about it, as well as the government just had to look at how much that was going to cost them to make their websites accessible. So then under the Trump administration just this year, they decided that they weren't going to move forward with putting the actual WCAG guidelines in to ADA. Now, does that mean that you're released from it? No. The reality is that since those lawsuits started happening a few years ago, we've seen cases fall on both sides of the issue. So even before the WCAG rules were put into ADA, we saw that Target, Netflix, McDonald's, big names were getting, million-dollar suits that said you must make your websites, you must make your apps, you must make everything accessible. Let me interject a question there that'll set you up with the next part. And it's about the lawsuits. I'm glad that you brought that up. With my client example that I was referencing earlier, that was the reason they reached out to us, was that they did not receive a legal letter, they didn't receive a threat or an action. But other people within their same industry did, and they noticed that there was a hot trend last year of having these legal letters or having these it's not quite the same thing as patent trolls, but basically pressure type legal actions just to see if they can get some money out of people. And their first questions to us as web developers who'd worked on their website was, do we have to follow this? And then the second question was, if we do, what should we do about it? So the lawsuits and the legal pressures is one of the things that is a way that many people find out that maybe they need to pay attention about this. So that's where I'm going with my question is, who needs to worry about this? Government institutions, agencies that work with or are part of or are doing services for government agencies. That's a given. You can imagine that's going to be the case. But why would Target need to worry about it? Why would Target need to have ADA type of compliancy? Or why would I with a website that I have?
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so that's a two-parter. So I'm going to start with the big group that literally does have rules in place at the federal and state level includes any higher education institution. So anybody who is a school, a K-12, anything, they are the ones that are seeing a lot of these, and if you can't see it, but I'm putting air quotes around frivolous lawsuits. And I'll get into more on that in just a second. And all of that falls under Section 508, which is technically separate from ADA. So we're going to talk about that one in just a minute. So, but the rest of the group, the ones that are all public, out there just doing business, we're talking about banks and hotels. And right now there's a lot of controversy about making sure that your employment applications are accessible. So if you are limiting a person with disabilities from applying for a job at your organization, that is a big topic right now, and that affects everybody. So that's a big group right there. And why are they doing it? Well, number one, you can go with the whole stick philosophy of if I don't do it, I'm going to get sued, and it's going to cost me money. But the better way to think about it is that if you don't do it, you're eliminating 20% of your audience. 1 out of 5 people have a documented disability, and that's everything from color blindness, hearing impairment, sight impairment, mobility issues, learning disabilities. And so 20% of the population is going to be shut out of your website in one way or the other, and that turns into dollars. That is a money maker. So that's the way to kind of sell it. And so, of course, we can go the stick aspect, and the reality is that anybody who has a website and is selling anything and is providing an experience for a sighted user, but they're not providing for a non-sighted user, then they could get,
And even and even for people without any disabilities, but who prefer to navigate by keyboards.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And the reality is that we all have temporary disabilities all the time. If you're walking around in a brightly lit situation, that's a temporary disability because you can't see the screen. If you have a cracked screen, limited data, even if you're carrying groceries in from the car and you're trying to navigate your cell phone with one hand, these are all temporary disabling situations that limit your ability to get through, a transaction task. And so you're wanting people to finish that task. You want them to finish the, commerce. You want them to buy. You want them to do whatever. So every time, and we all know this, right, as the designers and developers, anytime you make the process even one step more complicated than your user wants to do, then they're going to abandon it and go to somebody else easier. And that's the reality with this group, is that they will leave you and go to somebody else. So that's why you're seeing that all come up and bubble up. And then the Section 508 part I wanted to add was that, so there was, there's been several instances, like in Arizona State, for example, the entire state of Arizona, there was a gentleman, a lawyer, who just started doing blanket kind of lawsuits about everybody he could find about their website. So he filed something like 5,000 cases in a year. And it got so bad that in Arizona, the legislature decided to overrule the federal government's ruling of the websites need to be accessible. They said, basically, we don't know how else to combat this guy, so we're just going to say that they don't have to be accessible anymore. And then you have another example of, there's a lady on Facebook, I believe her name's Marcy, I can't remember her last name, but she did the same thing. She just put a call out to everybody on Facebook and said, hey, if you have a school website, a university, a K-12 that you can't access their lunch menu, or you have somebody where they have a video out there and it's not captioned, tell me about it, because I filled out this paperwork to the Department of Education and I will do it for you. And so she filed somewhere around 2,500 cases. So just recently this year, 2,500 cases were released from the Department of Education. Basically everything that had her name on it, they were released from doing the process of accessibility. But does that mean that this is going to go away? No, it doesn't. It's just that they were seeing this kind of, frivolousness kind of.
Right. Yeah. So that's the rising of the topic. That's the bubbling up of this as an issue, but it's still an issue. And whether people are having frivolous lawsuits or way too many of them in a year's time, the point about what they were going after is important.
Yes.
What I've highlighted on screen is just a quote about the different types of ways that people will access your website that you might not think about. And the first one in the list is screen readers, text-to-speech style screen readers. And that was one of the first ones that I was ever aware of. You know, it's something that certainly was a simple idea to conceive of, but I'd never spent time browsing a website with a text-to-speech reader. And I wish I had brought it up before this meeting, but I found one somewhere that it was a browser plugin, and it would show you how it ran through, and it was incredibly painful to go through most websites, especially a DNN website where you might be logged in as an administrator and you have all of those menu items available, and the first thing that it's doing is reading to you the name of every link and then the link of where it's going to, and then going on to the next one and 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 the next one for minutes before you can ever get to the title of the page and the first paragraph. So, you know, text-to-speech readers is one way that if you haven't ever thought about it before, it can be incredibly painful to go through a website with one of those. Maybe take some of these other ones and describe some other ways that people are seeing sites or experiencing them that we might not have thought of. Color issues, limited contrast issues. Kind of describe some of the other ones that people might not have thought about.
Okay. Well, I want to go back to screen reader for just a second. I wanted to let everybody know that there's a free screen reader out there called NVDA. And so I would recommend anybody who's interested to download NVDA on their PC and have that, pull that up and try that out. That is actually, there it is. That is actually the very first, when I talk to you about manual testing, that's the very first thing that I would recommend you do, that and keyboard accessibility. So when we talk about a lot of these, they're called assistive technology devices. You have eye trackers. You have people with mobility issues who use switches that may be operated by a shoulder movement or a leg movement. You have eye trackers and glow sticks and, just every kind of interesting way that someone would be interacting with a computer. The reality is that all of those are based on the same principle as keyboard navigation. So if you're building items that are mouse dependent, like a drag and drop, or you are using JavaScript that says the what is it called, the arm click.
Yeah, hover and mouse over effects. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So all of those things are completely unusable by a keyboard. They can't drag. There's no dragging, dropping. There's none of that. So you just have to make sure everything works with a keyboard. The main keys for using keyboard interaction are tab, the arrow keys, and space. So if it can't be gotten to with those items, then it's not going to be gotten to. So that's a big one. With color deficiencies, there's a lot out there. You don't have to worry about trying to test your colors for each type of deficiency. All you have to do is make sure that your color contrast ratios are within the WCAG guidelines. And I know that sounds weird. Like, how do I do that, Dawn? Well, there's a whole bunch of auto checker, browser extensions that you can download. Of course, our tool offers it if it's already in your code, but when you're in the middle of development or you're kind of coming up with your branding guidelines, style guidelines, you're going to want to use checker.
Well before development, you have that design phase where your graphic designers are in there, and one of the newest trends that's been with us for a year or two now is that the paragraph text, instead of being black, it's just a dark gray or a gray, or the menu is light purple on a dark purple background, but not quite enough of a contrast for you to be able to read. So a lot of it starts well before you get into development, and it's planning and thinking about it critically when you're doing design.
Yeah, and I really recommend that you, in your branding guidelines and your style guidelines, before you ever get to prototyping or wireframing, you decide on your color palette, but then go ahead and test all those combinations together and figure out which ones do not work. So if you, when I worked for Texas A&M, their colors are maroon and gray. Those are both lovely colors on their own, but when you try and use them together, it doesn't work. So you just have to put that into those guidelines before anybody moves forward. And I love to take the guesswork out of accessibility everywhere you can. So anytime you can develop any kind of web standards, branding standards that people don't even have to think about, you know, is this going to be accessible? Is it going to work? You're going to just make everybody's lives better. And then to your point about color contrast, one thing I like to stress is maybe you like to use the default focus. You know, there is a focus element that's kind of defaulted into most CSS, you know, HTML. The color contrast ratio on that is often abysmal because it's default. Nobody was thinking about, like, what does this mean and how does it look on this background or this background. So I would always say make custom CSS for your focus and also for your placeholder text in your forms, because placeholder text in forms is often a very gray, like you said, a very gray
light
kind
gray.
of thing, light gray, and so it's hard for people to see. And the reality is that one of the biggest groups we have right now are the baby boomers, right? And as they're aging, the two things that go on everybody's body, well, you know, besides the knees and the brain, is the hearing and sight. And so, and when your sight starts to go, those color contrast ratios become even more necessary.
So, Dawn, as we kind of segue into two more things, I want to talk to the group at large, everybody who's online with us.
Okay.
Go ahead and start preparing your questions. Start thinking about the things you want to ask. Get as specific as you like. You want us to bring up a website and talk about it. You want us to run some quick tests if we're able to, or talk about a problem. Let's start queuing up those questions. Maybe post into the chat if you have some questions and want to get them rolling. We'll start to pose them and bring you on to ask your question and start that conversation. Meanwhile, yes, go ahead, Dawn.
Okay, I just wanted to add one thing. So we are talking about web, and so one of the things I want to stress that kind of goes a little bit less noticed is that anything on your URL is part of your digital environment, right, and can be at risk if it's not accessible. So that does include PDFs. It does include, you know, any PowerPoint files or media files or Excel files, anything you have on your site, and that includes embedded content from YouTube, embedded Twitter feeds, embedded any kind of social media. Anytime, just because you were able to use somebody's code, you know, that was real easy because it was a social sharing or whatever, doesn't mean it was accessible. Oftentimes, an embedded YouTube video doesn't have any keyboard support. So it can't, nobody can even, with a screen reader, can't get to the video, the stuff like that. Just want to make sure.
That's an interesting thing that I hadn't thought about at all. Well, so Dawn, we're going to kind of go to two sections of things here.
Okay.
I'm going to bring on screen your website. We're going to talk about the module. We're going to kind of zoom in on the module and talk about two or three different things that I earmarked because I think they're important to mention and to talk about for the module. But before we do that, I'm going to switch over to your PowerPoint. If you wanted to kind of talk about a few of the different slides or a few different screens, let me know where to head to, and I'll move forward or jump forward to those as best I can.
Okay, let's jump. Let's see what's next. The next, not forward.
Oh,
and then this is just the 1 in 5 people have a disability. So forward. And then, okay, here I wanted to mention that accessibility and usability are not the same thing, but they do have a lot of overlap. So I don't want you to forget that if I make it accessible, then it's going to work for everybody. The reality is that there's some usability issues you have to consider, too, that aren't documented. You know what I mean? So we're trying to come up with an inclusive design. So let's move forward. I also wanted to let you know if you are working in the global environment, the WCAG guidelines are effective in Australia, Canada, the EU, the U.S., and as well as several other, like Japan. Gosh, I can't even think of them all. But WCAG is the standard, so that's what you should be working towards. And if we move forward again,
even though it backs up a little bit with Trump administration, it's still the standard, and it will continue to be in the future.
Exactly. Very good. And then here is just the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. It's currently in version 2.0. There is a 2.1 that is being developed this year. It should come out in around June. What does that mean for you? That just means that the group who came up with this, the W3C and some consortiums of folks, they are continuing to look forward because with the new mobile 2.0 doesn't really incorporate a lot of mobile stuff because mobile wasn't big when it was released in 2012. So that just tells you technology keeps moving, so these guidelines keep moving. And the reality is that you're aiming for level A and AA. So when you hear people say, I need to be AA compliant, it doesn't just mean you have to do those 13 items. You have to do all of level A and AA to be compliant. And then AAA is like the gold standard. You would be supreme if you did it. So, and some of those are low-hanging fruit. So if you are promoting yourself to different companies of we're accessible, we do accessibility, build it in, I would go ahead and say we do these many levels of AAA as well because you want to be a leader just in case these rules ever change. You want to be ahead of the game instead of trying to catch up.
Good description.
And then you talked a little bit about roles. In the actual CMS environment, you generally just have kind of two roles, right? You have your content contributors and your developers. Sometimes you might break it out into a designer group or authoritative group or something. But those are your big two. The reality is the plugin does help the content contributors as they're entering things in to know, oh, did I remember to put alt text for that image? Did I do that link correctly? So that's where that works. But here, I just wanted to let you know, if you're ever working with an organization, they kind of have to commit to it on all of these levels. It's got to be at the leadership level for procurement, project management, built into job descriptions, built into HR, all that stuff. So.
That's one of the items I'll elaborate on, and it'll tee you up for when we go look at the module in a bit. But I've been asked with clients worrying about doing a one-time scan for ADA compliance and explaining to them that if they want to do regular scans and they have them be infrequent, that's fine. But that the main person or the main activity that's going to, over time, make the site no longer ADA compliant after doing a bunch of work or a bunch of cleanup is the people editing it every day. And if they don't realize what they're doing or what their effects are, your website will slowly decay. It'll move down to being uncared for. And that having something to help tell you someone else has been on the web page previously and now it's worse than it was before, that's a big deal. And normally you would pay companies to come in and do that in an auditing process. And wouldn't it be awesome if you had a way to just do that and see it when you're about to press save or when you load the page at a page at a time? And so that's my segue later for when we talk about the module.
Okay, that's perfect.
All right.
And then we can move forward. This is real basic. You guys don't need that.
Yep.
We're moving forward. And okay, so with automated testing, these are the features of that was the features of our platform, but that's, this is again, so here are the features I talked about: quality assurance, accessibility, SEO, analytics, response policy. Just a lot of things that can work together. It's all it's doing is looking at your code. The great thing about any automated tool you use is that, especially when you have hundreds of pages that you're dealing with, you don't have to look through every line yourself. There's something else doing the very basic work for you.
Yep.
So if we move forward, again, one more. Okay, so this is me just going into some examples of what an automated tool can check, obviously for language, forward. It can check for your page titles, and page titles is important because it's SEO and sharing. If we move forward, headings. Okay, well, I want to pause here a minute. Headings are super critical for your screen reader users. Additionally, they're really great for every user, but this is really your content person's job, right? You have to drive this home for your content contributors, whoever's coming up with the content, that to put out a page that just has 14 paragraphs of information is horrible for anybody's experience because we're all in a hurry to get things done, so we need some way to get to the information quickly. A person who can see headings is able to see them and quickly get through, and the reality is that reading out the headings on a page is one of the first ways that a screen reader user navigates your page because they've come across so many mega menus. They've come across, like you were saying earlier, Ryan, it can take you 100, clicks or 100 tabs to get through the navigation of the site. So in order to bypass that, they'll just read the heading and hope that they've gotten to the page they need to be on.
Yeah.
Heading's super important. And then if we want to just keep going forward until we kind of get to manual tests. Distinctive links, very important. Images, we've got that. Let's go.
We were talking about color contrast earlier. This is a good example. White text on an imperfect background versus darker. Yep. You can see that that's not legible.
Exactly.
It's pretty good.
Quick.
Data table. Yeah.
Please do not be laying out your pages in tables, please.
Well, worse than that is many times when you're working with modules that have been built not by you, third-party modules or standard modules that you have, you may not have control over your data tables and how they are structured or what's in them. So that is one of the areas where it sometimes teaches you to audit and know the modules that you're using, to try and work with ones that have complete control so that you can edit things, or to customize and build your own with your favorite structured content type module that you can develop with. There we go. So.
Yeah, very good. Okay. And obviously you don't want your page to have any coding areas, so this is another one where an automated tool helps you out because it just gets that through there real quick. What do we got next? Okay, manual testing. So with manual testing, what I wanted to, I think there was one more page before this.
It was blank.
Oh, it's blank. Okay, for some reason it didn't load. That's weird. Okay, let's go ahead.
It might load in a moment. Yeah.
Yeah. But basically I had broken up manual testing into some categories. There's a content review, which this is. Again, I can share this deck if you need it. Here's some evaluation tools you can use. If you don't want to use a full kind of enterprise checking a whole site kind of thing, or if you're in the middle of development, you can check a page at a time. There's the WebAIM. WebAIM has the Wave tool.
Yep.
Siteimprove has a Chrome checker. There's several out there now. So there's a lot of, you can kind of just load them up into your browser, see which one you like the interface for, which one works best for you. They're all slightly different. And also, I do want to mention that all checkers are individually written. The coding for how the checker looks at your site is individually written. So checker A might find that you have 10 bad things or, warnings, and then checker B might say you have 35. Yep. Neither one of those are incorrect. They're just looking at the code differently. Now, the great news is that over the next 2 years, Siteimprove, DQ, Level Access, all of the big players in the checking, auto-checking world are getting together with a UN organization, and over the next 2 years, they're going to make consistent checks for everybody. So you're not going to see that inconsistency between platforms anymore.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah. And so that's in the process this year. This year they're focusing on the WCAG 2.1 because with it rolling out soon this year, and like I said, it's incorporating more mobile stuff, then they're going to focus more on getting as many of those checks into the automated checkers as they can, and then they're going to go back and standardize the rest of the tests. So that's good news. Did we want to, and then just to talk more about manual testing, another things you need to do are hardware manipulation. So that means unplugging your mouse, unplugging your speakers, changing the browser size, increasing the zoom because one of the biggest things we're having now is, as I said, people are losing their vision. And so what you have is people with low vision. One of the requirements of WCAG is that your website should be able to be blown up 200% and there'd be you wouldn't lose anything. Your content doesn't get lost behind a box or it doesn't get cut off because you're using
a big bunch of zooms.
Yeah, it's a bunch. And so, and the 2.1 guidelines are changing that requirement to 400%. So you might as well be prepared for that coming down the pipe. So hardware manipulation, and then
on screen for fun. Just since we were talking about editing, the testing tools. I brought up the Wave tool just to show, just an example of how it looks and the way it looks when it's reading through and rendering things, where it's telling you the number of errors, the number of alerts, the number of features that it notices that are in good shape. That's the difference that you were kind of describing, that every different tool has a different way of displaying it. It has a different way of describing what's in place. It has a different way of letting you know, but it also has a different way of evaluating where it sees certain problems. So that's point in case for your description.
Definitely, thank you. And so color to convey meaning, that's a big one. Basically, I was just trying to outline things that you're going to have to manually check and you have to know what you're doing. Media player accessibility is a big one. Okay, so assistive technology here. This is where you would use that NVDA screen reader we talked about. You download it on your computer, and you would use tab. You would start in the URL bar and start hitting the tab key. Make sure that it goes in a logical order. It follows the same visual order you would want. It goes across the top, and just like if you were reading a book. So check on tab order. Make sure it doesn't get stuck anywhere. That can happen if you have Moodles, pop-up boxes, if you have an embedded content that for some reason it can tab into but it can't tab out of.
Right.
Or some worse yet, you have embedded content that it can't tab into at all. So the screen reader user doesn't know it exists. And keep in mind, anytime you're having an action happen on the screen that you visually can see it, imagine if you remove the ability to see it. So like turn off your monitor sometime and see if when you have that Moodle, would you be able to get back out of it just using tab and arrow keys? Because sometimes that's what happens. It'll move focus to the Moodle, they can't get back out of it. Or it doesn't move focus. Or let's use the example.
Or once you gain focus, you can get out of it back to navigation like normal.
Exactly. Or let's imagine you have, one of those complicated forms you had to fill out, like a CMV. It's got 25 fields. You hit submit, and it just says you have errors. And it doesn't move the focus of the keyboard user up to the first error that, they encountered.
Right.
So they've got to try and figure out which field you were talking about. So just stuff like that, where you've got to kind of get out of your head of having sight and remember what would happen with those other users.
Yep.
And, so the screen readers, I did want to mention JAWS is out there. It's the industry leader. It's been around for 20 years, but it also costs about, I think it's like $5,000 a license. NVDA is free. I know, right? NVDA is free, works best with Firefox, so I've paired them up with the ones they work best with. And NVDA is gaining in a market share. Like it's coming up pretty fast on JAWS's heels. The reality is that all these screen readers work pretty much like 90% of the time exactly the same way. Every once in a while when you have interactivity, when you have something special happening that's not standard HTML code, you've built something really cool and fancy, that's about the only time you need to test in every single one, because we have found that there will be slight differences between each one depending on the browser, especially if you're working with HTML5 code and it's not supported in the browser, stuff like that. So and then the last one is VoiceOver, and of course VoiceOver is gaining in popularity too because, oh no, that's okay. But yeah, so those are the three. Next is just an example of visual focus. I don't think it'll work, obviously, because it's not. Yeah, it's a GIF, and we're in a PDF, so we can move forward.
Sorry.
And then examples move to pop-up, form fields, widgets. Don't forget those widgets and plugins. Hardware we already talked about.
Yep. You talked about the zooming.
Yeah, so that's pretty much most of the presentation I had. So if we did have any questions, we can jump there, or I can just keep talking.
So we'll come back around to it. I've got a few screens that I want to bring up and tie back around to specifically DNN instances and talk about that a little bit. But as I start to transition, David, Clint, anybody have questions that they posted online?
We just got one from Mark.
Yep. Mark, you want to come off of mute and kind of pose your question? Otherwise, we'll read it off. Yeah, there we go.
I just unmuted.
All right. Hey, thanks.
Yeah, we hear you.
So the question was, can we have two sites? One site the way we want it and another site that's compliant?
So this is a question that has come up quite a bit. And the reality is what we saw when people did try and institute that is that you have the problem that people will update the cooler, more interesting sites, and they won't update the less cool, boring, text-only sites. So you end up with two different versions of your site, possibly outdated information, possibly wrong information, stuff like that. So number one, that's a big problem, is just managing two sites. But two, the reality of the WCAG guidelines is what they're trying to stress to you is that you're providing an equal access for everybody and equality between both of those groups. So they don't want you to create a very simple, dry, no images, no interactivity version because they feel that you're not representing, your brand or what you're doing for the other users. So I would say if that is something you have to do because maybe you're limited by templates or budgets or something, then I would definitely mention that in your, I strongly recommend everybody have an accessibility policy statement somewhere on their site that says what they're doing about accessibility, addresses the WCAG guidelines, addresses ADA, says why they're making this commitment. And then if you are making special circumstances like that, then say why you're doing it, give a timeline for when you might be coming back in line where everything can be on the same. So that's what I would recommend.
So
I just unmuted Mark.
yeah, Mark, chime in if you have more on that.
Well, I guess I'm not happy with the answer, but I understand.
Right.
I was going to add in on that, almost word for word, that's the reason that Google forced us as an industry to have everything be mobile responsive. Because at the time that they made that choice, there was an almost even-handed approach to whether you had a mobile website and your desktop website versus having a mobile responsive one. And Google said that the main drive for forcing mobile responsive was because they looked at the content, and the other content was out of date, wrong, not as well verbose, not as well kept up, and they didn't want that. They wanted to encourage the opposite. And here we are today with mobile responsive being the way everyone does things.
Yeah, and the other thing I saw as a web developer and also a customer is that people were making decisions for me for what they wanted me to see on a mobile site. So they would say, oh, we're only going to make our top 10 tasks or top 5 things mobile activated. Everything else you have to go to the desktop version. Well, who's on a desktop anymore? So, again, don't tell your user what they want. Listen to your user and have them influence you.
Well, so a variation on that question is whether you can not skirt issues. I want to make sure I'm not phrasing it to say that you're avoiding fixing a problem. You want to try and fix a problem, of course. But one of the things that I've seen is that if you have an ADA policy page on your website, that gives you an ability to say that ADA is important to you as an organization. That can help you with frivolous lawsuits, that they see that you care about it. But then there's a spot on that page that says, if you need assistance browsing this website or getting content off of it, here's our phone number. Call us day or night, anytime. There's an answering service. And this form says, you know, are you looking for any specific information? Let us know, and we will reach out to you and talk and get human contact with you. Is that accessible? Right. I'm sorry. Does that work? Does that help the situation? And does it, again, not skirt problems, but does it help diffuse problems if you have that kind of offer on the website?
I think, it does go a long way. Number one, whenever we saw that these higher education schools or these, like I said, frivolous lawsuits were making it all the way to the Department of Justice, and they were receiving Office of Civil Rights complaints, which is under ADA, like we were talking about. We saw when those got the most momentum was when the website had not addressed accessibility at all. And oftentimes, if you look at a lot of state regulations for, state organizations, government, stuff like that, they're required to have that accessibility statement on their site, just like they're supposed to have a privacy statement or a security statement. So it falls in line with all that stuff. It shows that you're making a commitment to it. And I've seen they don't have to be verbose. You don't have to say, we plan to have our website by this time compliant. But by just saying that you know it's a thing and you're working on it, and like you said, I personally have always worked for agencies that, or places that work 9 to 5. So when we have a contact number on there, it's not a 24/7, but it does say that, we'll get back to you in a reasonable amount of time, 24 hours, whatever it is. And the reality is that oftentimes if somebody needs an accessibility issue, let's say it's a school and it's a school lunch menu, if you just work to make an accessible version for them to get that thing done, that's all they needed. That's all they wanted. They're not going to go file a lawsuit about that. They just wanted to find out. Or
wait for them to call you or email you through the form, and you'll send it to them. You'll email them the information. A human effort can go a long way to diffusing an angry action.
Yeah. Because, obviously everybody wants to be able to, at 2 in the morning, be able to go through the site and get whatever they want done. Yeah. But even all of us hit regular old Joes hit problems with not just accessibility but usability on a site, and you have to wait for business hours. So it's that same kind of process of just allowing people the ability to report these issues.
Now, Mark, did you have some follow-up questions, or did we kind of cover those a second ago?
Well, you did cover my question, but I've got more queued up for you.
Bring them on. Bring them on. That's what we're ready for.
Okay. Well, this next one is assuming that it's going to take a little while to make the website compliant, and then if we further assume that you might have more than one site, so now it's going to take a long time to get all those things taken care of. What can you do in the meantime to avoid lawsuits because you're not compliant?
Well, I hate to do the plug, but the reality is that by using an automated tool like ours or somebody else's, you develop a history report where you can show from the date I started with this platform, we had 1,000 errors, and then in the month of January we were able to correct 100 of them, and in February we did. The reality is everybody knows that this is not going to be done overnight because there's a lot that goes into it. It takes a lot of man hours, and the reality is that every developer already is working 125% of the time on everything else. You can't ask them to drop all that and stay fixed accessibility unless, of course, you make a commitment to it and pay a separate developer. But using something like that, an automated tool, or even your own tracking record of getting I always recommend looking through any contracts that you have with anybody, be it a CMS, a learning management system, somebody who's providing security or data storage or anything that your customers might ultimately have to touch externally. Look at those contracts, contact those vendors, and get a statement of accessibility from them. That says that they're getting a commitment to it. There's a document out there called a VPAT, a Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, that was put out by the federal government. And a lot of you might even see this if you start to contract with universities, governments. They might ask you to fill out this before they will work with you. And it's just voluntary, but it's probably about 5 pages long, and it lists out every single WCAG guideline, and it asks you to say, do you support it completely? Yeah, support it with exceptions, or don't support it. And so they want you to fill that out, send it in, and they want it to be accurate, obviously. And so that kind of process can happen between you and your vendors, or you and your customers' clients.
So to roll up the bullets that you just kind of ran through for Mark's question, earlier we were talking about having a policy page that had information on it, having a way for people to contact or reach out to you for more help. Those are two first things. You then said having an audit trail or a record of knowing that there are problems, dates when those were realized, and then showing and tracking progress towards making the fixes. Doesn't have to all be done, but just showing that you have that is a good step. And then doing what you can to look at everything that you have used that's third party or that you can track down to entities, and getting paperwork, files, the self-assessments of their accessibility, and being able to compile that together and say, your system uses XYZ elements and these are their documentation all gathered in one place. It goes to show an organization that's focused on or paid attention to it. It's kind of like with HIPAA rules, where a part of what you need to show is that you haven't been completely ignorant. And once you show that, they're a little bit more lenient on you for whatever's happened. That's like 3 or 4 good bullet points there.
Yeah. The only 2 I would add that are actually a requirement whenever someone has to work with the Office of Civil Rights about a complaint are a plan of action or a corrective action plan and training documentation. So those are the 2 additional things that someone might ask you for if you're actually going through a process, what's that called, a remediation process or, And so, that did cover the major ones.
So having those 2 things in place would also help show you that you've planned ahead of time. So if you haven't gotten legal action or people asking you questions, preparing that and getting it all organized together means that if you hadn't had training with employees, you cover training, and then you document it, and then that's 2 good steps there towards being in better shape. Nice. I like that. Nice.
And then I think I saw something about, one of the questions said something about certification. So one thing I wanted to mention is if there is a company out there that's telling you that they're going to put a little stamp on your site that says your site is certified, accessible by so-and-so, I would be really weary of that. I don't think that, I think the only person who can, and air quotes, certify your accessibility is you, because just like you said, Ryan, you've got people making changes to your site all day. You've got people making edits all the time. And so, again, this is where like an automated tool can come in and kind of help to monitor all that across all of your content contributors, stuff like that, and give you that report card. I was going to add one more thing there. When you do have a site that you know is really inaccessible or things just aren't working really well, there is one kind of middle step you can take. It's out there by a couple of our competitors, and we're going to be rolling it out later this year. And basically, it's an accessibility overlay. So it takes some of those key areas that are accessibility pain points that might have been missed, and maybe you can't fix them because of template issues or CMSs or whatever, and it'll do an overlay on top of your site and make that page accessible in those key areas. It's not going to fix everything. It's not going to fix all text or, that you did this and this and this and this, but it's going to fix some big ones and, again, give you that, get you slightly down the road to being more accessible.
It's a mitigation for some of maybe the bigger things that you could modify with script or CSS on the page as a modifier to what's there if you don't have control over the templates or something, right?
Exactly. Perfect. Thank you.
Well, so that's a good segue because, we invited you here because we're incredibly personable talking to us at DNN Summits, and we knew that ADA is a big topic, and that ADA with DNN is also a big topic. And And one of the things that I wasn't aware of that I was excited to see about was that there was a Siteimprove module that you can download. So on screen I've brought up the DNN store where we have the Siteimprove module in place here. And we're going to switch to a screenshot in just a moment and kind of let you tell us a little bit about it. But the thing I want to point out is that once you've installed this, it's there on screen, and it has elements that can slide into place or move up, so that anyone who is editing and working in the website gets the benefit of the tool, gets the benefit of the things that the tool is pointing out. So whereas before this was in place, if you fixed a website and you made it ADA compliant and you went from 1,000 errors down to 20 errors, that's a really great success story and you're happy. But then day number 2, the secretary and the content editor and that one guy who writes blog posts 3 times a year, they start editing content and uploading new pictures and using the site, which is great, but they start degrading all that hard work that was put into place at a snapshot, at a point in time. And so this tool, once installed, is there, and it can help those people. So even if they're not a designer, even if they're not a developer, even if they're not aware of accessibility, the tool is going to help them see what's going on the page and what's going on around them and alert them to it. So that's my kind of tee up to talk about this kind of screenshot that's here on the site. Again, we're talking about accessibility, but there's a lot more to this. So I'll pass it back to you, Dawn, to tell us a little bit about how this works for this kind of demo screenshot here.
You got it. So, Norm, what happens here is as someone makes the edits, they hit save. They hit the recheck button, and it immediately checks that code that was just saved out there, and it checks it against those WCAG criteria that I was telling you about. It then tells them things like, did they accidentally break a link because they backspaced or whatever? Did they have a misspelling on the page? But it also talks about some things like, oh, it looks like you forgot to put alt text in this image. This link text is too generic. It says click here instead of what it should say of exactly where it's going, things like that. So they get all that for them as soon as they save it and they hit that recheck. So that's great. It's immediate response, right? Additionally, it has this DCI score here in the middle. You see a little circle with an out of 100%. Basically, that's saying this page scored 78% out of 100. So there's probably still a few little things that can be tinkered with to make it better. The reality
what's
is
DCI?
Oh, go ahead.
And what's the abbreviation? What's DCI? I missed that.
Oh, Digital Certainty Index. That is a coined term. That is just our way of using that.
That's your
number.
term. All right.
Yeah, and so there are other platforms out there that offer similar scoring. The beauty about a score is it kind of gamifies accessibility. So you can go, oh, I want to get to 85% or whatever. There's a way to kind of make it more tactile, tangible to people, and give them something to aim for. So that's what that's about. And the reason why it might be now at 78 out of 100 is maybe some of those things are content contributor things, but some of them might be in the template. So there might be things that, in this, that number is for the whole page, but your content contributor might not be able to touch some of those. So they might not be able to get to 100, but that's how, the developer and the content contributor work together. But yeah, it's a great little plugin.
Yeah, Mike has a good question that kind of chimes in with some questions I was going to ask you about it. He said, where does this plugin show up? Does it show up on every page? Does it show up on just public pages? Can it scan a page that a user is looking at? Maybe they're an administrator and they're looking at a page, and that page isn't publicly accessible yet. You'd have to be logged in as an admin to see the page. Can they run that scan? Can it get out and get back again, or does it have to be a publicly visible page?
So my understanding is that it's any page that's within that CMS, the DNN. So it doesn't have to be public because this is running just on that one instance. It's not running on your entire site. So it's just running on that one page that it's viewing.
Right.
And so that's why it can be behind a login. It can be during development. It doesn't have to be public.
Perfect. Great answer. There's a button down in the bottom that says Need Help. When you click that, it directly connects to your cell phone so that you can help answer questions to people right on the spot, right?
24 hours a day. Yeah, totally.
What does that do?
That's all I do. I don't know how I'm not getting phone calls right now. No, it links you to our help center, which is public. It's out there on our site. I think you have to you have to be a user to be able to get fully into it. So let's say if you are a user, it's going to get you into that, and it's a beautifully SEO driven thing. You put in a phrase, a keyword, whatever you're kind of looking for. It's going to bubble up any kind of article that's related to that.
So it's a knowledge base. It lets you search for information. Okay.
Exactly. But additionally, there's some in-page tutorials that'll kind of help you, I don't know exactly what this error is.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about it? And so it's going to say, when I say that you don't have alt text on this image, it means that you're supposed to write a description that's for screen readers or stuff like that. So it's going to describe that error for them so that they can understand it.
Okay, so the other question about this module is that, on the DNN store, in the DNN system, this is a free module to install and try out, and that you're able to put it into a site. And if you're curious or interested in seeing what it can do, it's a very low bar of entry. You can take it out for a spin pretty quickly. What is the price? What is the service that comes along with this module? How does this work for Siteimprove?
So the great thing is that, number one, we're just committed to accessibility. We want everybody to be thinking about it and working on it. So the reason it's free is because you can do this free one-page scan, check on your things as you're developing, and we encourage you to do that. Now, where the cost comes in is when you want to have that history and when you want to see it across your entire URL, not just one page at a time, and where you want to divvy things out into groups and assign people, assign content contributors actual tasks of saying, hey, we found a 404 error on this page. It's your job to fix it. So that kind of stuff. So helping prioritize
across the whole website the worst of things so that they can be tackled first, down to the maybe lower hanging fruit, but the ones that don't matter as much. That's part of the service is your advising on that, right?
Exactly. And the great thing about using the actual platform versus one at a time is when you're testing one page at a time, you're going to find, let's say you forgot to put in the language attribute. You're going to be doing that, one page at a time. Whereas if you see the whole scope, you could tell, on this template, I forgot to put a language attribute. If I put that in there real quick, I just fixed, 150 pages. So that kind of thing.
And then, so you kind of described then the full platform versus the single page check. Is it the same module and you license it and then you get the full version? Is it a different install or it's different entirely?
So the plugin and the platform do run on the exact same, WCAG criteria. It's looking for all the same stuff. But in the platform, it's just more verbose. The same kind of things are there. You've got the big circle telling you your DCI score. You've got the broken links, the single A, double A, triple A stuff broken out, the prioritization, all the stuff we talked about. It's just presented in a slightly different format, but all those same aspects are there.
Yeah. Clint, you were saying another question?
Well, I don't know if y'all had answered Mike's question where he was asking if it works on pages that are not public.
Yes, we definitely ran through that one, and it definitely does. It's submitting from that module, submitting out to the service. So as long as you can see the outside world, it can communicate out and come back. That page doesn't have to be publicly accessible or outside of login.
We actually, when I worked for Mecklenburg County government, which I might remember several years ago, we did a migration from 1 old version of SharePoint to MOS 2007, I think. And anyway, they signed up for a Siteimprove account. and I've never covered or whatever. But when we got on the other side of that migration, oh my God, like that tool, like I would log into it every day, and it would go on a page and it'd be like, all right, this is alt text, this is a broken link. You can also put images.
Yeah.
But it was like, and our web leader, he was like, all right, like each webmaster had a different, like multiple departments, like park and rec, real estate, you know, whatever. And it was like you had to have your grade for your section of pages like up, and the Siteimprove was the tool that we used. So it was when I was talking with John Kurth and those guys, I'm like, yeah, I can attest to your solution. It definitely helped. But it's helpful in general, but especially post migration.
Interesting, very good use case experience.
Yeah. And that would have been in like, '06?
I was going to say, yeah, 07, 08. It was before the economic downturn, so.
Yeah.
So, Don, we kind of interrupted there. You were in the middle of a path kind of talking about the service that you offer and how you present that to people.
Yeah, so a couple of the things I wanted to talk about. So we do have the automated platform. Great, as I said, for development. If you have multiple URLs you're looking at, it's a really good tool. But the reality is to get a really clear picture of where you're at, you need manual testing as well. And so as we kind of jumped through pretty quickly, you could do all that yourself, but we also offer manual testing packages. So one of the things that I would, if you're seeing more and more contracts come in with this ADA compliance, I would make sure that you stress that you're going to do automated and manual testing before it goes out. You might even add, I think, well, it's going to cost you more, but it might be nice to even say a user study as well, usability. So that's the three-legged stool, I feel, of any kind of making sure that your website works. But if we're just working on accessibility, then it's automated manual. We offer those packages. But the bigger piece,
three-legged stool there. Your three-legged stool there. That's a good soundbite of wisdom. So you were saying to make sure you are stable, and that's what the analogy of a three-legged stool is. A two-legged stool isn't very stable. Three-legged stool is the bare minimum. You're in good shape. So that three-legged stool is stable. So you were saying it was the automated testing, the manual testing, and then it was also user group testing?
User testing, yeah. Because I said, it's the reality is, like, I just saw a great video the other day. A guy walking out to his car, he's got a button to open up his trunk. The button is accessible because anybody, people with assistive technologies or mobility issues can use the button versus a key. It's great. Pushes the button to open his trunk. It's got 2 inches of snow on his trunk, and when it opens up, all the snow immediately falls into the trunk because the gap between the trunk and the window. So we didn't think about usability. We didn't think about how this is actually going to work in the real world.
Yeah, usability versus accessibility. That makes sense.
Exactly. So that's why I feel there's three stools. I mean, 3 legs to the stool.
Anybody who runs across Dustin at user groups or at conferences know that he's famous for having very entertaining, colorful rants about things when they really touch him. And I turned to Dustin with surprise because that exact trunk example he just talked to me about when it was pouring down rain, in that you pop the trunk, and if it's pouring down rain, if the trunk's made badly, the second it opens just the tiniest amount, the entire trunk is filled with rain.
Right. It has been raining. All the rain is between the rubber and the cap, so that when you open it, it goes down these little channels like it was intentionally designed to pour the water into the trunk.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was meant to turn into a pool or something. Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, so there we go. Brings it right back around to real life.
All right. So one more thing that I wanted to make sure I stressed is, and we've been talking about it all evening here, the reality is that people have to be trained to know what their responsibility is. So if you just keep telling somebody, hey, go in there and put alternative text in, and maybe they only update the website twice a year or whatever, like the reality that you're going to be consistently having problems is real. It's just going to keep happening over and over until you give them this training and knowledge they need to make sure they're doing it right. So We also offer training. And as of tomorrow, we are launching a free course. It's free. You don't have to give me a drop of blood or nothing. You just go on the web, put in your email address, name, and you'll be able to get this course. And basically we're calling it General Digital Accessibility Basics. It's a way to get people to be empathetic about accessibility, to understand who the users are, to understand how they're getting to the site, to understand what we're doing. So that's why we made it free.
Is this a webinar that's recorded so that we could reference clients and people we're trying to help educate? Can we reference this to them any point in time, or is this something you do on a regular schedule or something?
Any point in time, and what I'll do is after we get up, once it's launched tomorrow, I will send it to you guys.
Yes, please.
So you can promote it with any materials. And it's an on-demand learning, so it's not just a webinar. You can step through it. 3 modules long. At the end, it has a little assessment quiz to make sure you retain the information. You get a certificate that you can post on the wall to say you know about accessibility basics. So I'll make sure you get that. Yeah.
Absolutely. We'll not only promote that on the Southern Fried Wrap-Up when we have all the links and things for this video, but you can be guaranteed I will send clients there as we start to explain to them why this is important. They can teach themselves and then get a third party to explain to them why it's important. Love it.
Perfect. Okay. Good.
Clint and David, kind of checking in with everybody online. Any more questions, any more comments coming around? Mike, did you have any more questions? Mark, did you have any more questions you wanted to ask him?
Yeah, he just asked.
Yep. A practical question, not uncaring. So what is it he says?
Could it be possible that what we need is a single better screen reader instead of millions of new sites?
Do you want to make it?
Yeah.
Volunteer?
That's great, Mark.
It's a really good question. I think one of the hardest things about all the different screen readers and the different screen accessibility type things is, I guess I'll say 2 things. Number one, technology is changing so quickly that it's hard for those to keep up because they're not the first wave of change and technology progress. They are the lagging behind wave. And so, A, technology is racing past the screen readers and keeping them up, and B, often people are on older equipment. They're on older machines. And so you might actually have some really great screen readers and screen accessibility things with modern workarounds. They're just not in the hands of most people yet. It'll take some while. Would you kind of agree with that, Dawn?
Yeah, definitely. And also, just as we're thinking about this, the other thing that's a big one is everybody wanting to have the voice assistant, right? The Alexa, the Siri, and the reality is those work on text. They work on stuff that an AI can get to and read automatically. Of course, there is some it can piece some stuff together. But the reality is that if it's not in your code and it doesn't exist there, they can't get to it. And that's the exact same principle with the screen reader tools. So again, we're not trying to code separately for each one. We're just trying to make sure all of them can get to it. So I like the new phrase is called, what's that called? Progressive enhancements. Basically make sure it works for the person who has no data and has a cracked screen and is working on the slowest network ever. And that as everything gets better on their device and their equipment, it just is a more enriched experience.
Yep.
We made it through the whole night without bringing up the lady Catherine Moss who's on Twitter who's all the time tweeting about she has vision problems and she's all the time tweeting DNN accessibility stuff.
Okay.
I know David sees it. Y'all don't ever see it.
Is she here? She should have been on tonight.
She should have been on tonight.
We will send her a link and tell her she missed her calling for a meeting to talk about.
Yeah.
Go to the comments.
Yeah, comment on the video. We'll ask her to do that.
Mark is fixing to start a business endeavor.
All right, there we go. And he can work with Siteimprove to help be the screen reader recommended to people who are having trouble.
Well, and to that point, I did want to let you know that we have users with visual impairments on site, and they do test our checkers, our plugins, our everything, so that it can also work with a screen reader. So we're doing that every time we have an iteration.
So we're kind of we're heading towards 8 o'clock, which is our wrap-up time to both finish up our conversations and kind of wrap things, bring things back in so we can close off for the end of the evening. And it's a pretty good time. We've gone through talking about Siteimprove, learning what Siteimprove can do. We've talked about ADA in general. We still have a lot of people online. Actually, more folks online now than we did when we started off. Are there any other questions? And while we're kind of gathering those, David, did you have any other anecdotes or elements about ADA that you've had experience with that you wanted to chime in on or add to the stories?
I mentioned a tool earlier that we use for doing color palettes for better accessibility and stuff. Very helpful for us. Just a free tool out there that you can kind of put a primary color in, and it'll give you a nice color palette to work with there off of that is workable.
Yep.
We deal with this all the time, but it's not a core business of ours. But we definitely run into this all the time. So we're kind of teetering into it. So I can see how this tool would be very helpful.
We will post in our blog post where we put tonight's video and the links and information we have. We'll put a link to that color palette builder and also to the screen that Dawn had in her presentation of several of those tools, both checking tools and reader type tools. So we'll have our links in there. Clint and David will help us promote and post that out in a little while, later this week or early next week. But so we'll get those out there. So David, you kind of mentioned that. Clint, do you have anything else?
And that's it.
I know
I
from
had a little question.
No, David, go ahead.
I just tried the browser plugin, which is awesome, but I'm on a site logged in, and it shows up a lot of wrong things for skin plugins and the persona bar. Does the DNN module skip that?
I'll have to get in touch with his name's John Kurth. He was there at DNN with me. He is our partner, account representative, and he knows so much more about the DNN plugin than I do. So let me make sure and loop him back around for that question.
I'll give it a try anyways. Was just curious because with the browser plugin logged in, a lot of things that are not visible have a false positive.
Are showing up. Yeah, okay. Gotcha. I'll check more into that, but yeah, that might be the case if it's within a certain viewing environment. But yeah, thank you.
Well, everyone, we have an excellent speaker signed up for us for next month. Every once in a while, we'll get ahead of the game, and we'll have the next couple of months planned out and hear from DNN Summit. We grabbed several people that couldn't run away from us in the hallway, and we got them on the hook to come speak to us. We have one more that is a brand new addition here for June. So our next Southern Fried DNN User Group meeting is always the third Thursdays in a month. So that's going to be June the 21st. So our June the 21st meeting is going to have Daniel coming on to speak with us, and we're going to hear his story championing some of the older modules that are being converted and updated so that they can come along. And, speaking from experience, David and myself, we've taken DNN websites where we'll inherit them. They'll show up and we'll suddenly get a DNN 4.2 website or a 3.1 website, and we need to march that up to 6 or 7 or 8, and many times it's those extra modules that stop you from being able to do that. I wouldn't even think that I could go to 9. And so hearing that you're kind of stepping those up a piece at a time, that's really, really encouraging. So we're going to learn more about that and talk about that for next month's meeting. Let's see, at that point in time, David, you'll be back from DNN Connect, so we'll be able to get a good story and recap of some of the things that happened at DNN Connect. If there are any videos and things that we can help share, we'll put links out to that, but DNN Connect is basically going to happen in between now and then, so we're looking forward to that. Thank you very much to Siteimprove for participating with us tonight for an ADA conversation. Thank you very much, Dawn, for being our source of information, our authoritative point of knowledge and experience on ADA here. Thank you for
sponsoring DNN Summit.
You did. For sponsoring DNN Summit.
That was awesome. And my contact information is available. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'll give you out the slide deck and anything else you guys need, resources that I commonly use, because I want everybody to be being as accessible as possible.
We appreciate the help, and it's a topic that everybody can learn more about always. You can always learn more, you can always practice more, and you can always see more tips and ways to approach things. So just staying connected is a big part of staying in the know and making progress. So thank you, Dawn, for your part in things, and we're really glad Siteimprove's being so heavily involved in the DNN community.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great evening.
All right. Well, tonight, I believe we are all going to adjourn and head out for some libations and food. So we're going to conclude this recorded portion of the session. Thank you, everybody who joined us for our DNN User Group meeting, Southern Fried DNN. Again, our next User Group meeting is going to be June the 21st, and we will see you then. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.